Hello.
I hear mariachi static on my radio, and the tubes they grow in the dark. And I'm there with her in Ensenada, and I'm hearing Echo Park. Carmelita, hold me tighter. I think I'm sinking down, and I'm all strung out on heroin on the outskirts of town. And I'm sitting here playing solitaire with my pearl handled deck. The county won't give me no more methadone. They cut off your welfare check. Carmelita, hold me tighter. I think I'm sinking down, and I'm all strung out on heroin on the outskirts of town. Got upon my Smith Corona, and I went to meet my man. He hangs out down on Alvarado Street by the Pioneer Chicken Stand. Carmelita, hold me tighter. I think I'm sinking down, and I'm all strung out on heroin on the outskirts of town. Carmelita, hold me tighter. I think I'm sinking down, and I'm all strung out on heroin on the outskirts of town.
Hey, it's Mazzy. Welcome to the Asylum. I wanted to do for a while videos on specific labels that were really important, and Asylum Records was one of the important labels in the 1970s, the first half of the 70s into maybe till 77, 78. Now they're still around and in different formations, and I'm going to show a pile of my records that are on Asylum that are, to me, epitomize what the initial sort of the DNA of Asylum Records. In 1971, Asylum was started by David Geffen and Elliot Roberts. There were two agents, young agents in Hollywood, and Elliot Roberts represented Joni Mitchell, and David Geffen was representing a new artist he was trying to get signed, and that artist was Jackson Browne. He was trying to get him signed, and he went to Atlantic Records and to Emmett Erdogan and said, "You got to sign this guy. I'm going to make you rich." And apparently the story goes, Emmett Erdogan says, "Look, maybe you should start a label and then you'll be rich." And so he actually gave the seed money to David Geffen and Elliot Roberts in 1971 to start Asylum Records. What a great name. In a way, it doesn't really fit what the initial direction of the label was about. When you think of Asylum, it seems like later that would be a punk thing, which obviously wouldn't happen until 77, 78 and beyond. David Geffen kind of parlays the whole label thing and then starts Geffen Records. 1980, one of the first artists he signs, John and Yoko, Double Fantasy. And of course became part of the Hollywood moguls with Spielberg and so on and so forth. But this is about Asylum Records, and it really started as sort of a singer-songwriter, the whole Laurel Canyon, Southern California thing. They did dip their toes into rock and roll and heavier rock like JoJo Gunn, which I don't have here. I don't think I ever had a JoJo Gunn record. And a handful of other artists that I don't have here. But there was a real kind of LA clique. And think about this. In the 1970s, the record business in Hollywood became bigger than the film industry, was bigger than the movie industry. If you drove down into Hollywood, down Sunset Boulevard, all the billboards were record company releases, record company billboards. It was the golden age of record making and the music business. It really shifted heavily from New York, which was still obviously the big thing of Black Rock and Columbia Records and all those East Coast labels, but LA scene, Warner Brothers, and the whole thing with Burbank, and was where it was kind of at really at that point. And sort of the wunderkind, David Geffen, with Elliot, and Elliot actually would go on to manage Neil Young, and Neil Young says he was the best music manager in history, and that's for another day. But he starts out and he puts out this record. I don't know if it was the actual first record on Asylum, but this is from 1972, the year I graduated high school. There's a whole clique of musicians that became these session musicians that really crossed over to a lot of these records I'm going to show. Now, this opens up with Jamaica Say You Will, a song that I absolutely love. I fell in love with it because I heard the cover version by Tom Rush, the folk singer Tom Rush, on Columbia Records prior to hearing the Jackson Browne version. The song on this album that became sort of an FM hit was Doctor My Eyes. Very catchy song. He had a way of writing these great songs. And of course, as the story goes, it was an incestuous friendship with Jackson Browne and Glenn Frey and John David Souther. They were roommates together, and of course, it begat the Eagles and that whole genre, which I'll go through soon here. Now, it has Russ Kunkel. Leland Sklar was kind of in most of these records, except maybe for the Linda Ronstadt records, was kind of the bass player. And he's so iconic, tall, gaunt, thin, huge beard. He has a great YouTube channel you should check out if you want to hear stories of all the session stuff, all the tours he's done. What a great bass player. One of the tightest bands ever. The second record, For Every Man, is amongst my favorite of him, of Jackson Browne. And this starts off with the song Take It Easy. His version of Take It Easy is an amazing song. And of course, it begat the Eagles version since it was co-written with Glenn Frey. And that became probably the first big hit for the Eagles. And there's a great song on here, These Days, which became iconic for so many reasons. Again, Tom Rush covered this. He, in a way, championed Jackson Browne songs early on. And of course, he wasn't a big name in terms of record sales, but he had been around from the New York Greenwich Village folk sing of the 60s and did several songs. But These Days was also wonderfully covered by Nico, Velvet Underground fame. On here, but you got David Lindley. David Lindley really became a big part of the sound of these records and did some great lead guitar playing. Jim Keltner on drums, Don Henley on harmony. I mean, Russ Kunkel, David Crosby, David Lindley. The scene, again, was very incestuous. Fantastic record, his second record. I think one of his perfect records, he made several. He was one of those artists in the 70s. He had a great 5-record run until maybe, was it Lawyers in Love or one of those that I kind of got tired of him. That period of time when a lot of these musicians were crossing over into the punk scene. I was into the singer-songwriter. To me, LA was that center of this musical universe in the 1970s, more than my San Francisco. They kind of traded a different sound, very, in a way, a slick sound, but all of these records are really well recorded, and they sound fantastic. Original pressings, early pressings sound great, so you don't have to go for audiophile pressings. But this became sort of notched it up a little bit, raised the bar, and became a really beautiful, heartfelt, a wonderful record. Late for the Sky, Fountains of Sorrow, further on, The Late Show, For a Dancer, Before the Deluge. He expands and does sort of these longer winded songs in a way like what Bruce Springsteen would do several years later, but in a whole different style. And again, that LA style of music. And this is a fantastic record as well. The Pretender, a lovely, lovely record. This was a little heartfelt. His wife at the time committed suicide, so he raised his son. And there's all the emotions in this song. Jackson Browne was a very personal writer, very intimate in some ways. He just put his heart out on his sleeve. One of the surprising albums that really kind of showcases being on the road is literally called Running on Empty, and it's based on being on the road, rock and roll. Running on Empty, The Road, Rosie, live tracks, and especially at the very end. He does obviously the cover of the Reverend Gary Davis song, Cocaine. And the Loadout and Stay is sort of the kicker, the hit off this. Got a lot of FM play, this long song. And he talks about the loadout where the roadies come in and load the equipment and they're on to the next town. And he gives thanks, really. It's a tribute to roadies and being on the road tour. Ends with the Maurice Williams classic Stay with a wonderful, bizarre falsetto vocal by David Lindley. Fantastic record. So Elliot Roberts was managing Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell signs to Asylum Records after being on Reprise for so many years, started on Reprise, and starts with For the Roses. Really wonderful record again. And of course, in 1974, Joni Mitchell explodes. She always was a good catalog seller, had a great, strong following, but she hits the charts big time on Asylum Records with Court and Spark. And this was on all the radio stations, AM and FM. Free Men in Paris, Help Me, Twisted, which was an amazing cover of a Lambert Hendricks and Ross song. This was a groundbreaker that really put Joni Mitchell, not just from a folk singer, became sort of a pop singer. And you could hear her leaning into the jazz world slightly, which she would all encompass a little while later. Followed up in 1974 with also with this Miles for Isles, a tour I saw. This is the only time I ever saw Joni Mitchell on this big tour. She had Tom Scott, LA Express backing her, so a very kind of tight, slick sound. The cover on here, the rock and roll cover on her, Big Yellow Taxi, is sublime. It makes it a totally different song. Really great song. Promo copy I got back in 1974. And of course, then she starts making a series of 3 albums initially that really are heavy on the jazz fusion world, which I think a lot of people is folk jazz fusion that some people didn't know what to expect, and they didn't know how to handle these records. Since this time, these records have become iconic records, but they weren't big sellers. There's the first one, The Hissing of Summer Laws. Again, beautifully recorded record, beautiful centerfold photograph by photographer Norman Seeff. Love this one. I think the best and the most accessible out of these 3 is Hejera. This is actually the second. I did see her at the Last Waltz. She performed Coyote, which is from this record. And this is a gorgeous record with beautiful bass playing by Jaco Pastorius, another white label promo copy from my collection. More photographs by Norman Seeff. And then the third of this kind of, I see it as a trilogy. Who knows if people do, but Don Juan's Reckless Daughter. one of the most interesting songs on here takes up a whole side. This is a double album, and that song is Paprika Plains, over 16 minutes. Just a really lovely song. Just there's a whole jazz smoothness, but not soft in terms of boring that she does on these albums, and this one especially. In 1973, I think Asylum Records had a few clunkers, like high expectations, and I remember this album, just so excited about this coming out, and David Geffen and Elliot Roberts were able to get the original Byrds back together to do a reunion album. The original Byrds hadn't recorded since, 1966 all together. And this is their reunion album, The Byrds, Gene Clark, Chris Hillman, David Crosby, Roger McGuinn, and Michael Clark, the original 5 Byrds from those first 3 records on Columbia Records. He gets them back. This was such a disappointment to me. Over the years, I've learned to enjoy it for what it is. I think, again, the strong songwriting is from Gene Clark, opening up with Full Circle. But everyone's got some songs they do for free, a cover of a Joni Mitchell song. There's a couple of Gene Clark songs, a couple of Roger McGuinn songs, 2 Neil Young songs, Cowgirl in the Sand, which is kind of nice. It just doesn't have that full harmony and that full feel. It almost seems like their solo work lumped together to make a Byrds album. But again, it's not a bad album by any stretch, but it really failed to really make a mark. Okay, this next record is a really important record, but became important over the years. It was a guilty pleasure for a lot of people. It was a unknown masterpiece for no people, and that's Gene Clark's No Other. David Geffen was incensed that this went way over budget, took so long. He didn't get this album. It was long tracks. There weren't enough tracks, shorter tracks that he could market. But this No Other it was a cult classic for many years. And we used to play this in the store all the time. And this is 1974. This is an amazing record. It's an unusual record for Gene Clark. And it stands out amongst all his records being so different, but it became a huge cult classic. It's gotten reissued since then. And in a way, Asylum Records just really pushed it down and didn't give Gene Clark the support it deserved. And I think it could have been a bigger record. I'm not quite sure if it would have been a hit, but FM radio should have pushed this even more. And Geffen into FM should have pushed it more because they had the whole infrastructure to promote it. And they actually failed because of David Geffen. 1974 also put out this debacle in a way. Not a bad album. Again, David Geffen and Elliot Roberts and Asylum Records was trying to replicate the Crosby, Stills, and Nash magic, in essence. In a way, it's like putting together a super group. You got John David Souther, great songwriter, was part of the round with the Eagles. You got Chris Hillman, obviously, from the Byrds, and you got Richie Furay from the Buffalo Springfield, and then you got Jim Gordon, Perkins, and Harris, the rhythm section, and I shouldn't say sidemen, but they get a little of the short shift because they're not the name. But this whole record, SHF, kind of like SN, and then Y, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. They did 2 albums. The albums more or less bombed. I mean, this isn't a bad album by any stretch. It's not a great album. I think Border Town's probably the most successful song on the album, but the Souther, Hillman, Furay Band from 1974, Asylum Records. But the biggest coup for 1974 in the record industry was David Geffen getting Bob Dylan signed away from Columbia Records. Contract had ended. Columbia puts out a album called Dylan of outtakes and covers that didn't get a lot of love. I think it's really an interesting record. But Planet Waves, he brings the Dylan and the band together, the band back him up. This had a really different sound for Bob Dylan when it came out, and I really enjoyed this record. It's a loose record. It's sort of a swampy record. It almost seems not well rehearsed, but that's what's kind of wonderful about this record. It's not slick at all. And I mean, Robbie Robertson, I mean, the band is perfect here, I think. And the songs are really well written. On a night like this, just the way he sings Tough Mama, it's got a really kind of rockin' swampiness to it. Forever Young, one of Dylan's most beautiful ballads, and he sings it really well on here. It's got two versions of it. I think it's a fast version and a slow version. You Angel, You is a great track. Love, love, love this record. And of course, that year was the first year I saw Bob Dylan. In 1974, this comes out, Before the Flood. I love this album. This is a great live album. I'm thinking this is the first time I remember this row of everyone holding lighters up and matches up. In the days when you can smoke up inside a concert. And that became such a cliche thing, but I don't recall it happening before this show. And I went to two of these shows at the Oakland Coliseum, and seeing that, just that vastness at the Oakland Coliseum of people holding these up was pretty amazing. So it really fits putting this on here. He does acoustic versions on here. He does the whole thing with the band. The version of Most Likely You Go Your Way, I'll Go Mine, he just yells it. It's almost like this proto-punk kind of style, if Dylan could have it. He had it on Hard Rain 2 years later. But fantastic live album. The irony is after this, something imploded, and Dylan re-signs with Columbia Records, leaves Geffen, and subsequent years, these two albums would be released on the Columbia label. Okay, Asylum Records, the elephant in the room is not an elephant at all, but it's a bird, the Eagles. The Eagles have become this band that people love them or they love to hate them. They look at Don Henley and Glenn Frey as punchable artists. Amazing artists, dictatorial in a way they led that band, some would say. You need to watch that self-indulgent, 4-5 hour documentary on them. It's really interesting. And now you can't deny their talent. You can't deny they made great records. You can't deny the records, especially their first, well, all their records. They didn't make that many, 5, 6 records? All their records are really well recorded and sound amazing. And Glenn Johns came in to produce them. And of course, this is their debut, Eagles, on Asylum Records. And this is 1972. This is a second press. The first press folded out in a weird construction of a vinyl album cover. This is a second press. This is one of the best sounding records in my collection. I know there are all these audiophile pressings of this now. You don't need one if you have an early, beautiful sounding pressing. Now, what's great about this, it opens up with Take It Easy. That became their first huge hit, co-written by Jackson Browne and Glenn Frey. But there's so much on here, and all the songwriters got a shot on here. You got Randy Meisner, you got Bernie Leadon, who played amazing banjo. You got a Gene Clark, Bernie Leadon song, Train Leaves Here This Morning. You got this great song by Jack Tempchin, and people say, who the hell is Jack Tempchin? Some people who don't know, but that song, Peaceful, Easy Feelin', I just want to get up and sing it because it's such a catchy song. It's just a great road song. It's being out free in the desert. I don't know if this guy was on peyote or what he was on when he wrote that song. Some people like to knock that in the whole country rock thing, feel that this kind of, like, how come Poco didn't get famous? Or how come Graham Parsons or the Byrds' Sweetheart of the Rodeo wasn't more famous? The Eagles took country music, made it a little slick, but I tell you, there's a lot of great songwriting and a great production, great playing, and above all these other bands, a lot of the other bands at the time, harking back to the Beatles and the Byrds and Crosby, Stills and Nash, they had some of the best harmony singing of any group around this time. And everybody who was into the singer-songwriter period got all into the Eagles. And it's easier to knock them now, 50 years down the line. This is a 50-year-old album now. I played this 3 times in the last week leading up to this video because I kind of got like so tired of the Eagles. They were so big. Their hits record is so big that I couldn't listen to them. But this is an amazing sounding record. When you blast this, if you have a decent hi-fi rig, this is really good. So peaceful, easy feeling. The Eagles follow up with Desperado. I'm not going to get into the whole craziness of the Eagles and personnel changes, and again Henley and Fry being the sort of the head and pushing people out, bringing people in, shifting things around, them having the control. But again, another Glenn Johns produced album. This is a really wonderful kind of a country album, almost like got little tinges of bluegrass. It's a concept album in essence, in a way, cowboy record, and it's really good. And it's got obviously, the great, simple, catchy song in Tequila Sunrise. But one of the best songs on here is just one of their most beautiful songs, and that is Desperado. It soars. It's a ballad. It's a storytelling song, and Don Henley's vocal on that is sublime. I really love that. All this time during this sort of period of the Eagles, there was the overlap with Jackson Browne and some overlapping songwriting at the time. You got Randy Meisner and Bernie Leadon still able to do maybe 4 songs on this album, but you can see the tilt really shifted to Henley and Fry. And their third album, On the Border, got a little more rockin' with Already Gone. You got Midnight Flyer, the Randy Meisner song, which is kind of a good song. He had a thinner voice, but he had a really interesting voice. He didn't have the sexiness or sensuality of a Don Henley, Glenn Fry harmony at all. And it's amazing that I think Don Henley is still one of the great vocalist drummers around. James Dean, another great song written by Jackson Browne, Glenn Fry, Don Henley, John David Souther. So, Jackson Browne and John David Souther, J.D. Souther, were really entrenched in the songwriting of these things as well. Now, one thing on here that is an amazing song, and I'll get into him a little later, is Old 55. That's the cover of one of the best songs ever written by Tom Waits. And their version of that, where it kicks in at the end, freeway cars, I don't even know the words there. And they're down here to 4 members. And then their 4th album here is The Eagles on the Border. This is really a lovely record too, a promo I got. One of the Nights is a great opening, had that great riff, a little more rockin' than they'd been doing, although all their albums have some rock numbers. We always think of the lightness of the Eagles, but they were a good rock band. They were a tight band, well-played band. Lion Eyes is just a beautiful song. And Take It to the Limit, I'm glad that Randy Meisner had a hit in that song, because it's such a great song. It's a really different song for the Eagles. After 4 records, Asylum puts this out. I'm only showing this because this became the biggest selling record of all time. Only surpassed for a little while by Thriller, Michael Jackson. But now this is still considered the biggest selling record of all time. And the irony is, it only covers their first 4 records. It doesn't even cover what I think, and some people think, is the masterpiece the band ever put out. And that is the drug-infused, cocaine-infused album, Hotel California, with this great photograph of the Beverly Hills Hotel, 1976. And what I think is wonderful about this record, that Joe Walsh comes into the band and gives them sort of like a kick in the ass they really need. Life in the Fast Lane is on here, and just everything is great. Hotel California is, to me, one of the great openers ever on an album. I don't have to say any more about this, but the Eagles' Hotel California. J.D. Souther had, I think, 2 to 3 solo albums on Asylum Records. Is the only one I have, and his records never rose to the heights of a lot of these other records I've shown you here. They're really good records. He's got this beautiful voice. He's got these beautiful golden eyes. I don't know if you can't see it here. Beautiful man. would work obviously with the Eagles, with Jackson Brown, Linda Ronstadt. This is actually a good record. For some reason, his records didn't click as much and become as big. But this is produced by Peter Asher, who would go on to produce all the Linda Ronstadt records and manage her. Now, speaking about Linda Ronstadt, I admire her so much. I don't think she is getting the creative due that she should be now. There's a documentary several years ago, just 2 or 3 years ago, you should check out. It's really great. But this is the record that kind of changed it for me, although I had a couple of her records on Capitol Records, more country-laced records, and that are beautiful. I love those records. And of course, we know she was in the Stone Ponies, did the song Different Drum, written by the Monkey, Michael Nesmith. This was interesting. This is Don't Cry Now. This is her first album for Asylum Records. And this has some of the greatest songs I think she's ever covered that really fit how I see her, how I enjoy her. Love Is No Pride, a beautiful cover. Now again, she's not a writer, she's an interpreter, but she can take a song and make it hers. And Silver Threads and Golden Needles, another hit. She covers Desperado on here, that Eagle song. And I would argue that this is the better version. Both are great versions. It's such a beautiful song. Colorado, the Rick Roberts song, is sublime on this record. Everybody Loves a Winner, and I Believe in You. To me, the only song on here that I have a problem with is her rendition of Sail Away. She sings it beautifully. She sings it so dramatically and romantically at the same time. And if you know the song, written by Randy Newman, it's a song about slavery. And it just seems like she has the wrong tone for that. Not that she sings it badly by any stretch, but the way you need Randy and Randy's voice to sing Sail Away. And that was the song on his album titled Sail Away, which I think is the great song. This, Don't Cry Now, is an amazing album. The irony in this is that this was on Asylum Records, and then it turned out she owed one more record to Capitol Records. So after going from Capitol to that Don't Cry Now on Asylum, she has to do one more record for Capitol Records. I'm showing this just to show context. She does this record, Heart Like a Wheel. This is her breakout record. It became huge. She covers You're No Good. She covers Heart Like a Wheel, a great, she calls the album Heart Like a Wheel, which is the Anna McGarrigle song, which is a really beautiful song. But the Phil Everly song, When Will I Be Loved, is the hit on this record, the first hit on this record. And she really nails it. She can sing rock and roll. I don't always love all her choices and all Peter Asher, who produced these albums, choices in rock and roll, but she nailed that song. And she does the great song written by Lowell George called Willin', had been covered by the Byrds, Sea Train. I think actually Little Feat recorded it twice. This is a gorgeous version. If you give me weed, whites, and wine, and show me a sign, I'll be willing to keep on moving. A lot of great covers on here, and that's what she does. She pulls up songs from artists, not all known, and she really makes them, and this was a huge album. Of course, she finally is on Asylum for good on her records and does a series of huge, massive records in the 1970s, starting with the 1975 version. Prisoner in Disguise does covers of songs by Smokey Robinson, Lowell George, Neil Young, James Taylor, Jimmy Cliff, McGarrigle Sisters, Dolly Parton, J.D. Souther. Really showcases artists. Linda Ronstadt has a great sense of talent. And I will say one thing, and I don't say this, and I'm not making this up, Linda Ronstadt basically invented the Eagles. Now, you could say that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a good thing ultimately. They were her backup band. She brought them together to back her up. Obviously, they were friends, segmented different friends, and brought them together. That was her backup band. And they wanted to go out, and they were given a chance to make a record on Asylum Records, and she, with their blessing, said go with it. A lot of artists would have said, no, wait a second, you need to stick with me. I put you together. No, their first gig was at Disneyland of the Eagles. And look what happened to the Eagles. Linda Ronstadt had her own thing and made these great records. Of course, Hasten Down the Wind. What I love about this person, I'm a huge Warren Zevon fan, and that title track was written by Warren Zevon, one of his most beautiful ballads. Again, she covers these great, great artists. She covers Carla Boneff, Ry Cooder's and Russ Titleman's song. The Tattler is on here. Linda Ronstadt did write one song in Spanish on here. There's also a John and Johanna Hall song. John Hall was the founding member of the band Orleans. You got Linda Ronstadt and Andrew Gold. Andrew Gold became a big figure as a guitarist with Linda Ronstadt around this time. Now, going back to When Will I Be Loved, there's an awesome lead guitar solo in that song, which just makes that song, lifts it to another level. And the story goes that when Linda heard the playback, she didn't like that lead guitar thing initially, but she was proven wrong and later said, yeah, it's perfect. Andrew Gold, and I saw her on tour with Andrew Gold. I think the first time I saw Linda Ronstadt, she was opening for Neil Young at the Troubadour in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard. So that brings this whole LA thing together. And Andrew Gold, I've seen him several times. He did a solo record, but he did a great record, which I don't have anymore. And it's good. It's not great, but his guitar playing and his sort of putting these bands together for Linda and playing with her is really an important part of this whole story. Another huge album for Linda Ronstadt is this record. And this is Simple Dreams. And of course it has It's So Easy, the song by Buddy Holly. Now, here's my only problem a little bit. I don't love some of her versions of the rock and roll songs that Peter Asher apparently brought to her to cover. Back in the USA, the Chuck Berry song, It's So Easy, the Buddy Holly song, Tumblin' Dice, the Rolling Stones song. Now, she does it great. She can belt it. She can sing rock and roll as well as any other woman. But especially with Tumblin' Dice, it's the exact arrangement of the Stones, so why bother? That's how I look at it. But there's so many great things. She also does Mohammed's Radio on here, which is another Warren Zevon song. She did, I think, 4 or 5 Warren Zevon songs. On here, what's great, she covers Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me, another Warren Zevon song. And Warren rewrote some of the lyrics, especially for her, because the way Warren sings it obviously is from a male point of view and really kind of twists it. And it's really interesting. When I heard she was going to cover this, I was really interested in what she was going to do. I took her back to the Hyatt House. I don't want to talk about it. Some would say that Asylum record has sort of an easy sound, that little country rock, folky, what we know as the LA Laurel Canyon sound, and there's a lot of truth to that. But they also went in several different directions here and there. Now, I'm not going to get into, Asylum still exists as a label. Again, David Geffen and Elliot Roberts sold it. In fact, I think Geffen was out by 75, maybe 76, at least. But he still managed some of these artists, and him and Elliot Roberts worked with these artists. And again, it was incestuous, and it's become a different label, expansive, part of the WEA group, Warner Electra Atlantic. Used to be Electra Asylum Records back in the 70s. But an artist they picked out, which to me does show a little bit of a different vision. And maybe because, and I don't know the whole history, and I don't know the inner workings of if Elliot Roberts and David Geffen suggested that this artist cover that artist and say, hey, Linda, would you cover more John David Souther? Although J.D. Souther and Linda were very tight, very close. Dated for a while, but been friends for life, definitely. And there was that incestuous crossover, I said, in terms of songwriting, playing. But one artist that really stood out differently, and amongst my very favorite too, and that's Tom Waits. Now, as I said, Tom Waits' song from this album opens up with Old 55. And this album came out in 1973, and that was covered by the Eagles. So again, that really put Tom Waits on the map as a songwriter. Tom Waits has a very unique sound. Amazing piano player. Obviously, his later records, when he went to Island Records, it started at the very end of Asylum. But he went to Island, he became sort of this, put these records almost like, what do they call it? I want to say junk musician, but he does these different instruments and his voice literally from, I think it was 74 to 76, went down an octave or two, got low and deep, and he always had that raspy voice, but it was a lot more melodic early on in this period. He was the balladeer, the lounge piano player singer you'd find in some dark, dingy dive bar, and he ate that up, and he personified that kind of artistic endeavor. And when this album came out, I had the pleasure of seeing him in San Francisco. Asylum Records did a showcase. A showcase is when it's a concert, but they invite people from a record industry, from radio, to come and do a showcase, a special private, in a way, Essence performance, if you're on a guest list or something. And out on the Great Highway in San Francisco, right down from the Cliff House on the edge of Golden Gate Park, there's a building called the Beach Chalet, and it had been kind of closed for many years. And what is infamous about it was an old building, and in the lobby of the building, there's these beautiful WPA murals from the war project, art projects from World War II. Gorgeous California renditions of, I think, Diego Rivera is the artist that painted these particular murals. And for years, that building was, it was sort of, you could get in occasionally, have a tour of it or something, but it was closed down until, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago. It was renovated into a restaurant upstairs and a visitor center. So you should go check it out. Island Records had a showcase with Tom Waits, and it was him. What I remember so much about it, about 100 people there at the most. A beautiful grand piano, Tom Waits singing, telling stories, and one giant palm tree they had, almost like a set. And these windows, bank of windows on one side, facing west, looking over the darkness of the Pacific Ocean on the Great Highway in San Francisco. And it was one of those perfect musical nights. And he told stories, he performed. He is charming, he's funny, he is a riot. So this is a great record. But to me, in some ways, this is his, it may just be his best record. It might be his masterpiece. Now, I've thrown masterpieces. He's had a lot of great, amazing records, and he's changed and he's morphed, and some records may be more important. But this is the point where he has that, I mean, he always has that throatiness, but he has this great set of songs. He has New Coat of Paint, which is a great opener. Diamonds on the Windshield of My Shoes. He's got this great, and this is something that goes on for his entire career. You can tell he's a fan of the whole Beat generation, of the Jack Kerouacs, Lawrence Ferlinghettis, Michael McClures, Ken Kesey's, and he sings and talks about strippers and bars and cocktails and drinking and getting drunk, and it just personifies it on this album and the subsequent albums beyond that. The Heart of Saturday Night, it really tells that kind of noir style thing. You know, I talk about another artist who's the king of LA noir. He was that, but obviously he's been in the Bay Area for decades now, Northern California. But he is one of the kings of singer-songwriter noir contemporary music, contemporary over the last 50 years, yeah, but really great. What a great, great album. Every track on this is wonderful. And of course, I mean, I talked about, you know, strippers and drinking and cocktails, Small Change, right? The dressing room in a striptease joint, burlesque house. This is a very special record too. This is a 2-record live record, and this is produced by Bones Howe. And what's really interesting about this is a live record recorded in a studio at the Record Plant and Wally Heider's in Hollywood in 1975. So there's a small, maybe 50, 75 audience, probably a specially invited audience. He tells stories. He talks about the dark side. He kind of fuses jokes in while he's playing. It's definitely like being in a piano bar in kind of this loungy club on a Saturday night or a Friday night. It's such a wonderful storytelling album. Not that he's telling a whole story and then playing music. The stories are told within the confines or the expanse of the songs he's playing. Another album to me I consider a masterpiece is Foreign Affairs. This great picture. And this album, also produced by Bones Howe, is reminiscent to the other one, but this is live, no audience, live in the same LA Hollywood studios with an orchestra, and everything is recorded live with no overdub. So it's got that sound of him with the orchestra. This picture is by Hurrell, the famous Hollywood portrait photographer. I think that is Ricky Lee Jones in the picture, silhouetted. Hurrell is very famous for this sort of dark, shadowy, silhouetted lighting photography in Hollywood. One of the amazing, unlikely duets on this album is with Bette Midler, and it's called I Never Talk to Strangers. And it takes on this conversation of a man and a woman singing to each other, meeting in a bar for the first time. It's such a beautiful recording. And this whole record, the sound of it, the arrangement of it is just sublime. A favorite to some, and I like this album a lot. It's not my favorite, but I like it a lot. Blue Valentine. But what's really wonderful about this, it opens up with the song Somewhere. There's a place for us. Pretty good, huh? Somewhere, which is from West Side Story, and it's just a great version of it. But another great continuous Tom Waits album on Asylum Records. And now the shift begins, and we're going into 1980. This is late for the records I'm showing here from Asylum Records. But Heart Attack and Vine is when he really switches it out. And you can see what's going to happen when he goes to Island Records. And this is an intense, wonderful, brilliant, really shift up in his style. Heart Attack and Vine. It's got Jersey Girl, a great, great song that Bruce Springsteen would cover also. Wonderful. In fact, when I first heard it, I don't think I had heard this, but I might have heard Springsteen's version first, thinking, oh yeah, of course this is a Bruce Springsteen song. Jersey Girl. Tom Waits writing that song? I was really surprised. But this is also produced by Bones Howe, and it's another fantastic record. Now, in closing, as much as I love all these beautiful singer-songwriters and harmonies and artists, probably the most volatile of all of them is Warren Zevon. And he's probably my favorite, maybe with an asterisk. This is his first album for Asylum. He had an album before that on another label called Dead and Alive, which is really a terrible record. He toured as the sort of musical arranger and band leader and piano player for the Everly Brothers for some year. He knew, or he had met when he, at a young age, Aaron Copland. He studied orchestration, and all the orchestration bits on his records he arranges, he composes and arranges. He's a brilliant musician. Personally flawed, but maybe what makes that brilliant. I would say this album especially, this is a debut produced by Jackson Browne. Again, this has everyone who was everyone in Los Angeles on it. And his voice is gruff, not like Tom Waits. And he has these beautiful harmony singers that really kind of sweetens it a little bit, but not too much. He's got, on the first song, Frank and Jesse James, Phil Everly of the Everly Brothers singing harmony. He's got John David Souther and Jackson Browne on another song harmonies. He's got Lindsey Buckingham playing guitar. This is around the time, this is 1976, and Fleetwood Mac was just hitting it with their first album before, just at the time Rumors was coming out. And Rumors is another one, that whole slickness LA sound, even though they're originally a British band, but they were that LA sound. They were down there, even though, again, Buckingham and Nicks were from the Bay Area. So they were a part of that, but obviously they weren't on Asylum, they're on Warner Brothers Records. But a lot of these musicians were crossing over. They have Jackson Browne on harmonies. They got Lindsey Buckingham on harmonies. They got Glenn Frey and Don Henley on harmonies. You got Stevie Nicks. You got Bonnie Raitt and Rosemary Butler. And you got, quote, the Gentleman Boys closing up on Desperado Under the Eaves, a classic for Warren Zevon. And that is Carl Wilson arranging it with Jackson Browne and Warren Zevon and others. Now, this is, to me, the best noir album about 70s LA. You know, push aside Tom Waits and his sort of noirish thing. This has a dark side of LA. It's got also a magnificent, heroic, Copeland-esque side of the West in terms of cowboys, of Jesse James and what's going on. This is a true dark California record and a beautiful record. It's my favorite by far Warren Zevon record. The follow-up, which was co-produced by Jackson Browne and Waddy Wachtel with help from him, was this album. Now, this had a lot of songs that he had ready to go in the first album, but that didn't want to front load that first album. I think the hit everyone knows, if you don't even know Warren Zevon, is Werewolves in London, which to me is one of his least interesting and almost like a gimmick record. It's almost like a novelty song, but it's still a great song, and it's a really funny song. He has a wry sense of humor. He's got an amazing lyricist. He can write the greatest love songs, as you can see by Linda Ronstadt covering his songs. But this, I mean, this would have been one of the most incredible double records of all time if they'd done that. Good thing they probably didn't. And this became a hit because of Werewolves of London. But Johnny Strikes Up the Band, great song. And one of the most beautiful written historic songs. Now, he writes a lot about social politics, world geographic politics. Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, Excitable Boy, about basically a serial killer in a way. Accidentally Like a Martyr. Nighttime in the Switching Yard is them doing a little bit of the disco drum thing. Veracruz, another geopolitical song. Tenderness on the Block, a beautiful, again, mid-tempo ballad. And Lawyers, Guns, and Money, again, an intense, raucous closer that just is, again, that geopolitical, amazing thing of being in Honduras, send lawyers, guns, and money, Dad, get me out of this. Bad Luck Streaks in Dancing School, great cover, great concept. He has these interludes, these classical interludes that he wrote, very, again, Copeland string quartet type of music. A volatile artist. Twice he's shown guns on his record. A Certain Girl, which is a great song. Jungle Work. Heavy-Handed Heart again. But you got Leland Sklar again on bass again, one of the great bass players. Rick Marotta on drums. Linda Ronstadt sings on several of his albums, also background. And you got Warren Zevon, his great piano playing, and of course a great guitar playing by Waddy Wachtel, who I mentioned, who plays with Linda Ronstadt and Jackson Browne, and it's so great. Glenn Frey on here. One of my favorite songs on here is, well, he does Ginny Needs a Suitor. He covers a Bruce Springsteen song that Bruce had never recorded at the time here. And he does this great song called Play It All Night Long. And even though there's a couple other records of Warren Zevon, this great live record, which is almost like proto-punk hymn, intense live record, one of the great single live albums. He was very volatile live. I was able to see him 3 or 4 times. Good albums. I'm not going to show everything of Warren Zevon. I'm going to close out here with just one stanza of this great Warren Zevon song, Played All Night Long, very influenced by Leonard Skinner. Grandpa pissed his pants again, he don't give a damn. Brother Billy has both guns down, he ain't been right since Vietnam. Sweet Home Alabama, play that dead band song. Turn those speakers up full blast. Play it all night long. Daddy's doing Sister Sally. Grandma's dying of cancer now. The cattle all have brucellosis. We'll all get through somehow. Sweet Home Alabama, play that dead band song. Turn those speakers up full blast. Play it all night long. I can't think of another song that has the word brucellosis in it. Can you? Anyway, Asylum Records. Mazzy loves you.
I was staring in my empty coffee cup. I was thinking that the gypsy wasn't right. All the salty margaritas in Los Angeles, I'm gonna drink them up. And if California slides into the ocean, like the mystics and statistics say it will, I predict this motel will be standing until I pay my bill. What don't the sun look angry through the trees? Don't the trees be crucified? Don't you feel like desperados under the eaves? Heaven help the one who leaves. Still waking up in the mornings with shaking hands, and I'm trying to find a girl who understands me. But except in dreams, you're never really free. Don't the sun look angry at me? I was sitting in the Hollywood Hawaiian hotel. I was listening to the air conditioning